It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Good morning, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show, the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Last night and now this morning is one of those weird occasions where I could not get to sleep. I was wide awake. It's no big deal. I just played on my phone, finally got to sleep, and then, weirdly enough, woke up extra early this morning. So here we are recording segments because there's not a whole lot else I can do because it's too early to call people yet. So we're going to do a fun little show. A couple of good, fun things coming up. But before I do that, I want to address my solar panels. Now, as regular listeners know, I put them on the roof just a little bit over a year ago, and I have a full year of results, and I'm just going to keep it in general terms. The solar panels produced almost exactly what the company guessed they would, maybe a few kilowatt hours more than that, about 13,000 during the calendar year. And for probably the average house and the average user, that is more power than you probably use in a year. Now, I happen to have a little bit bigger house, and I have 2 electric cars, and I have a home office with computers, so we use more than your average electricity. But my electricity cost here is 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour, so it's not too hard to do the math that I probably saved something close to $1,600 in the last year on electricity. And of course, if electric rates go up or taxes on the electricity goes up at some point during the next few years, I would technically save more and more. The solar panels are supposed to last 25 years, and the out-of-pocket cost for me was around $13,000. So $1,600 times 10 would be $16,000. It'll take about 2 years less than 10, or 8. Weird how I do math in my head sometimes. But about 8 years for quote-unquote nudge, nudge, break even. And I've had a few people recently ask me about the solar panels and the math about how it works, so I figured I would just cover it here for everyone who wants to know all at one time. And regular listeners have asked me, hey, Phil, what if you just put that money in investments and made 10%, give or take, and used that to pay your electric bill? Which is exactly the thought process I have gone through for years and years. And even this time around, the one thing that I learned different this time around is if you were to sell your house shortly after putting on solar panels, maybe within the first 5 or 10 years, the research suggests that you would actually get more for your house. Not a ton more. The number they came up with was about, well, for the size of my system, about $10,000 to $11,000 to $12,000. So I was basically putting $13,000 worth of stuff net on my roof, and it increased the value of the house by $10,000 to $12,000, maybe even $13,000. So the value of the house went up almost exactly equal to the amount that I put on the roof. So in a way, I didn't actually spend the money. I mean, I did. Clearly, I spent the money. It was out of my pocket. But I get that savings, and someone else who's looking at the house might pay just a little bit more. And of course, on top of all of that, I think it's the right thing to do. It's particularly with this episode, I didn't even make that connection. Maybe my brain did, even though I didn't. Later on in the show, we're going to talk to Charlotte Dennett, and she has done a lot of studies on things that regard Republicans, oil, wars, militaries, Middle East, spies. You're going to love it. You're absolutely going to love it, and you should get the books, at least one of the books that she's written. But for me, back many years ago when I bought my first Prius, I think it was an '05 Prius. Oh my God. Has it really been that long? My very first Prius, people would ask me, oh, did you buy it to save on gas? It'll never pay for itself, blah, 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 which probably the idea that it would never pay for itself. Who buys a car with the idea that it would pay for itself? One. Two, it comes really close to actually paying for itself when compared to a vehicle that uses a lot of gasoline. But that's not why I bought it. I bought it to do my part to use less oil. Sure, by using less oil and possibly a slightly more efficient energy source, which could be nuclear or coal, I might reduce carbon emissions. That's an excellent side benefit for me. My original goal, and still a high priority for me, was to reduce my consumption of oil, because oil sucks. And the price you're paying at the pump for oil does not come anywhere close to reflecting the true cost that you and all of us pay to have that liquid, because our militaries, our corporations, our citizens pay the price sometimes, too many times, for us to be able to get oil at what may or may not be a reasonable price to you. But if the oil companies had to pay all of the costs to secure the lands, to build the pipelines, to protect the pipelines, you would not be paying $3, give or take, dollars per gallon of gasoline. I don't think you'd be paying $4 either. I think you'd probably be paying more like $10. And that's what it would cost to actually get it and protect it and ship it if governments and militaries weren't involved to try to make all the trade routes and the pipelines secure. Whereas a good chunk of the electricity I put in my cars comes from the solar panels that are already on the roof of my house. Another thing that pops into my head, I'm not going to go into the details of the math on this, but people are like, oh my God, how are we going to create enough electricity to power all these cars? A very fascinating thing is that we use a large amount of electricity creating gasoline. The oil doesn't pump itself out of the ground. That takes electricity. The oil doesn't just naturally flow into a tank next to the well. That takes electricity. It takes more electricity to put into a truck, or at least gravity, once the tank is filled up to a high level. It takes gasoline or diesel to then move the oil. If it's in a pipeline, the pumps often run on electricity. And then when the oil gets to a refinery, it takes a lot of electricity, a lot of energy to burn, to cook, to do all the chemical processes to separate things out of oil. And of course, that electricity has to come from somewhere. And then we create a lot of byproducts and waste with all of that. And then that gasoline or the other liquids that we want out of the oil has to go into a new truck and be sent to a gasoline station. And of course, using gasoline, a regular fueling station, an energy station, I'm going to call them going forward when I can. And of course, they can just hook up the truck and the gasoline falls down by gravity into the tanks under the ground. But then again, there's electricity to pump it up into your car. There's electricity to run the lights around. So by using gasoline, you're not avoiding electricity. I've seen some estimates that say that the amount of electricity used in all those steps to get oil into gasoline and into your car, if we just used that electricity, we would have electricity left over. Now, is all of the electricity in the right places? No, there's going to be some adjustments. But of course, if a generous portion of people that can, if they put solar panels on their house over the next 5 to 10 years, we won't even need to change much of anything because you'll just fuel your car at home 90+% of the time. Wow. Okay. Back to the show. We'll talk to Charlotte Dennett. That's the solar panels. The other thing, I've had some emails recently which are absolutely fantastic, and I thank you for sending them, where people have pointed out mutual funds that have beaten the S&P 500 or beaten whatever index you want to look at, and they ask a wonderful, brilliant question, which is, hey, I see these funds that have beaten the S&P 500, as an example. Maybe it's a good idea to have some managed funds to outperform the market from time to time instead of just matching market performance. And it's absolutely delightful that they ask this because that's a great question to ask. And of course, the 4 books that I recommend that you read will cover this. First one is Winning the Loser's Game. Second one is A Random Walk Down. I'm sorry, the first one is not Winning the Loser's Game. That's the third book. The first book was, well, I can't believe I forgot that for a minute. The Richest Man in Babylon. And again, a warning, it's an older book. So some of the attitudes and styles of writing and the way people are addressed, you might be bothered by. So just keep that in mind. But the financial content is fantastic. The Richest Man in Babylon. You follow that up with A Random Walk Down Wall Street, then Winning the Loser's Game, and then Common Sense on Mutual Funds. The first 3, you can get them in any format. Kindle, audiobook, paperback, I don't care. Matter of fact, the first one is old enough that people have recorded it themselves reading it aloud on YouTube. You can watch it for free. The fourth one you should get in a physical form. I think it's available in both paperback and hardback, but Common Sense on Mutual Funds. And the last 2 books go over this topic, but just really brief. I'm not going to do a whole segment on it, although I probably will in a few weeks. In any given year, and almost in any given time frame, you can find mutual funds that beat, I'm going to stick with the S&P 500 index fund for the purpose of this little idea. Can I find year-ending 2021 mutual funds that beat the S&P 500 for the calendar year of 2021? Of course I can. Of course you can. It's easy. You just go look them up. Matter of fact, they'll probably be out there screaming and yelling and trying to get more advisors to recommend their funds. The question is, did you know which ones to buy last year? Now, sometimes a fund can last for 2 or 3 or 5 or even more years beating the index. And I had a listener send me an example that just crushed the S&P 500. It is truly impressive, this fund, what it has done in the last 5 years. The S&P 500 has done amazing things in the last 5 years, doubled, but this fund probably tripled in the last 5 years. So their thought was, why not use this fund? I looked at the 5 years before 5 years ago. So the fund did great in the 5 most recent years, and then I looked at the 5 years before that. It dramatically underperformed the S&P 500. Matter of fact, in 2016, it underperformed the S&P 500 by about 17%. So my question to you and the question to the person who wrote me the wonderful email is, at the end of calendar year 2016, when you're looking for U.S. stock mutual funds that are managed to buy, what is the possibility that you're looking at this fund that has dramatically underperformed for the prior 5 years and underperformed the S&P 500 in the calendar year of 2016 by 17 freaking percent? Is that the fund you're going to buy? Now, of course, almost no one in their right mind is buying that fund for the purpose of beating the S&P 500 over the next 5 years, because you can see the 5-year track record and see that it sucked. You would have no reason to believe that this horrible fund is going to beat the S&P 500 in the next 5 years. Well, guess what? It did. So how do you know in advance which fund is going to beat the S&P 500. If we all go collectively to a racetrack for horse racing, and at the end of the race, I go, Lucky Strike. I don't know if that's a real horse name. Lucky Strike. It's a real cigarette name. Lucky Strike won this race. You should have bet on him before the race. No fucking shit, dumbass. But did you know that before the race? And you could claim that you knew it, and you could show me your ticket that you bought for that horse. But can you win again and again and again? That's where the magic of index funds come in, because on an average year, the index fund might only beat 60 or 70% of the funds that are out there. But in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, it falls to something like 1% of managed mutual funds beat the S&P 500 index. When I say managed funds, I'm talking about U.S.-based stock owning managed funds. Only 1% over 10 years or longer beat the S&P 500. I am not aware of any way whatsoever of knowing which funds those are going to be in advance. That's the magic part that we don't have. And so without knowing that, you have to look at the average fund. And the average managed mutual fund underperforms the index by around 2%, 2.5%. And the funny thing is the average investor doesn't even do that well, because you tend to move the money, whether it's because you're in a 401k and you switch jobs, or a 403b, or your company switches from one management company to another custodian for your 401k, so you're compelled to move around, or by choice, or because you're trying to beat the market. Some way or another, you end up moving around your money, even in a tax deferred or tax privileged account. When you move the money around, what tends to happen is you sell things that have done poorly and you buy things that have done well, and you're kind of locking in the underperformance by selling low and locking in a loss by buying high. And you switch to new managed funds from time to time with part of your money, and you don't even get the average underperformance that mutual funds get. You get something below that. And of course, if you're in a taxable account, you might lose again. So this is what can cause a lot of people to look at their returns in normal years, not the fabulous years that we've had recently, when the normal stock market return is around 10%, and they look at their results and they're making 4. And they think, wow, mutual funds suck. Well, if you don't have the right ones, they sure can. So the segment I have was recorded a couple of weeks ago before I got some of these emails. And I thought, oh my God, I have to put this segment in this specific episode of the show. And I did some research and I found a website, and who knows, they may not have the right exact funds, but you'll get the idea. And I found the best performing U.S. stock-based mutual funds, managed funds, for the calendar year 2016. Now, these guys crushed 2016. And collectively, as a group, these 10 funds beat the index for the preceding 5 years on average. Some did, some didn't, but on average. So if you had bought? Oh, I'm learning so much Italian, I can't do English anymore. If you had bought these 10 mutual funds 5 years earlier than 2016, so it'd be 2016, 15, 14, 13, 12. At the beginning of 12, you would have beaten the S&P 500 over 5 years. You would have crushed it in 2016. And you would think to yourself, these funds are amazing, I'm going to buy them. Well, guess what happened over the next 5 years? I'm not going to tell you. You have to listen to the segment. It's actually quite a short segment, shorter than this introductory piece. So I'm going to end here. We'll take a quick break. We'll do the investing skeptically, some of the best performing stock-based managed mutual funds for calendar year 2016. We're going to talk about their performance in 16, the performance for the 5 years before. And then now that we have the new data, 17 going forward, we have the 5-year data of how these funds did after their magical year of 2016.
How you can justify wanting to take something away from people from 95 that gives meaning to 95% of the American people and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people?
Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so. As Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
Past performance does not necessarily indicate future performance, or something like that. You hear that all the time, but yet the fund companies and Morningstar, who I adore their website to go get information, and I used it for this segment, they have their star funds, and this information, historically what I've said is that this information is not only is not useful, and in fact, it may be detrimental to use something like the 5-star rating or looking at historical returns for mutual funds. So I have an example, and I thought you might find it interesting. I looked up and found the best mutual funds for 2016. Now, some of the criteria, these were U.S. stock funds, not bonds, not international, just U.S. stock. The vast majority of each fund was in the U.S. stock market. Each one of these funds has assets of at least $100 million. So it's not little teeny flukes where, really small fund. These are big players. And I found this nice table or list in Investors Business Daily, the title of the article, Best Mutual Funds of 2016, in case you want to go look it up yourself. So I'm trying to use evidence, data, information. You can go double check yourself. So I went through the top 10 performers and pulled out ones that were brand new, just again to try to make it more reasonable that it wasn't just a bit of luck. And again, in calendar year 2016, as measured by the S&P 500, the U.S. stock market total returns, including dividends, was up 11.96. Not a bad year. The 10 funds that I'm looking at have a collective average, assuming you put the same amount of money in each one of these funds. They returned 40.71% in calendar year 2016. 40.71. Now, I thought it was very interesting that they also showed the 5-year data, because like I said, I wanted to make sure that they had some historical data. These 10 funds, on average, over the last 5 years, before including up to the end of 2016, this is important to make sure that we understand this is 2016 data so far, they returned on average per year 15.4, and the S&P 500 by the end of 2016 had a 5-year historical number of 14.66. So in the past 5 years, these funds as a group underperformed the S&P 500 by 0.8%. And in the 1-year number, 2016, calendar year 2016, the market measured by the S&P 500, made 11.96, and these bad boys over 40% on average. Absolutely staggering performance. So what I thought, hey, okay, I have this data from 2016. How did these funds do up to now? So, I mean, I went back and picked something from roughly 5 years ago, and now I looked at these funds for how they've done the last 5 years, because you might think, well, shit, these are the 10 funds that did the best. They have more than 100 million. They're only U.S. stock. They are on to something. So I'm going to buy the ones that have done the best and put my money there. Out of these 10 funds, 2 of them closed. So funds don't normally close if things are going well. And with these funds, things did not go well. One lost 20% in a very short period of time, and the other one lost 44% over a period of about 4 years. So I kind of divided the total loss that they had over 5 years just to get an approximation. It's a little sloppy, but it's expedient, but you get the idea. These 10 funds, 8 funds, plus some losses for the 2 that somehow went terribly, horrifically wrong. The average return for these funds in the last 5 years, now ending at the end of 2021, was 6.3%. And you might say to yourself, hey, that's not so bad. You know, if the market return normal is 10, these guys lost 6%. And you know what? What I'm going to do here, I'm going to take out the 2 negative numbers, and instead of dividing by 10, divide by 8. Let's be fair. I'm only going to count the 8 that survived. Instead of 6 something, it's now 9.5%. And again, you might say, well, 9.5% is not so bad. But the S&P 500 over the last 5 years, ending on 12/31 of 2021, the last 5 years, the returns were 18.5, 18.48, 18.5%. So these funds that crushed calendar year 16, you could say returned half as much, but that's, I don't know, that's a really good way to look at it. But when the S&P 500 returned 18.5, these funds returned 9.5. So you lost 9% per year. So if you had $100,000 and the growth, not even including compounding, just losing 9% per year to growth. Oh shit, I'm going to have to run that up. I'm going to have to calculate that to get an actual number, but you lost a lot of money. You lost a lot of money. And you went to a website. You could also go to a magazine or a newspaper, whatever, and find the top performing funds for the last year, the last 3 years, the last 5 years. And I've said it before, and I need to emphasize it again. It's very easy to pick the best stock funds when you look at historical data. What is it? Hindsight is 2020. It's absolutely easy. And you can do the same thing with stocks, by the way. You can look over the last 5 years, what stocks were the best. And in this case, the 10 mutual funds, now cut down to 8 in real time, who crushed 2016, actually had a market beating return of the prior 5 years, ending in 2016. But if you bought all of these, you made 9.5 instead of 18.5 going forward. That is a shit ton of money to lose on compounding and depreciation. It's just something you don't want to experience. And that's why index funds are so magical, because it's the index. And I didn't even include any loads that these might have. I didn't include any weird distribution of expenses to you. I didn't even look up where the funds went to. But, just kind of a quick and easy look of 5-year performance. So even when you pick the 10 best, or 10 of the very best, because like I said, I filtered out a few, 10 of the very best, which actually beat the preceding 5 years, and you think to yourself, this is a great way to go. It sucked. And this is very normal. This is very normal. Now, does it always work this way? No, of course not. There's some randomness in it. And, how did these funds get to be the biggest performers? Maybe they happen to have 2 or 3 of the stocks that just crushed calendar year 2016. But they didn't get lucky again. They became average. And the average mutual fund underperforms on an average year when the market makes approximately 10. The average mutual fund makes 8 or 7%. Now, here they were behind by 9%, but it wasn't a 10% return. It was 18.5%. But just another example of why those lists and star ratings are not only useless, they're counterproductive. Using them as a guide to what to buy will hurt you. It will convince you that you found a way to find who's doing well and who's going to do well in the future, and it just doesn't work. And one of the things I know about the industry is that when a lot of advisors, I don't even know if I want to say most, but a lot of advisors, when they sit down with you and want to create a portfolio to show you, I'm buying some of this, I'm buying some of this, and the 1 and 3 and 5 year numbers are good on all these funds, so these are some of the best funds. It makes a lot of sense. They want to pick winners for you. They want to look good. They want to show you they're doing the best. And so they can easily go pick funds like this or some funds that they have access to or availability to, because not every mutual fund advisor can choose from anything. I mean, if you work for Wells Fargo, you're probably going to use Wells Fargo funds, or at least a lot of them, and maybe some affiliated businesses. And you might throw in some index funds from Fidelity or Vanguard or Schwab or some other place to make it look like a more rounded out portfolio. But it's a fun thing because when they give it to you and they show you the historical performance, it looks great. Absolutely. They look brilliant. And I even have had in the past where someone will contact me and say, hey, Phil, the market was up, and we'll just use the same number. The market was up 18.5% over the last 5 years, but I had someone pick a bunch of funds and they didn't return 18.5%. They returned 27%. So, can you beat that? Well, if I am allowed a historical perspective to pick and then show you the historical numbers over the last 5 years, I bet I could beat that. It'd be really fucking easy. I could go through a database online, or I get software that lists all the mutual funds available to buy. Could I go through there and pick out a handful of funds that have an even better return? Yeah, of course I could. But it's not helpful. It's, again, counterproductive. Anyway, that's some information on the value of looking at funds with really good 1 and even really good 5 year performance. It just doesn't work, and these funds tend to be very volatile. They got lucky. That's how they'd had such a high number, but they somehow don't get lucky. Did even one of these? No. Now, the best one was 14.5% versus the 18.5% for the index. So they return back to normal, and the normal is returning materially less than the index funds. And that's just the way things work. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions.
Anne Widdecombe says slavery has to be considered in context. What's more relative than that? There were people at the time, Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, there were innumerable humanists and secularists who said slavery is evil. The church wouldn't agree. Now, which is it then? Is it that the church is wrong, or, even more suggestive, that God has not yet revealed that it's wrong to them? Or did God support it all those years and then change his mind? From a beginning point of absurdity, you arrive at a terminal point of absolute moral chaos. And I think you've at least done us the favor of making that plain this evening. God, in short, God did not make man in his own image. It is precisely to the contrary. Mammals and primates made many gods and many churches in their own rival images.
Okay, everybody, we're back. Yay, I'm so glad you're still here. Of course, the interview today, as I promised, is with Charlotte Dennett, and we're going to talk about her books and her newest book, and maybe a little bit about her and her dad and her stories. And I just finished the most recent book, which is The Crash of Flight 3804, A Lost Spy, A Daughter's Quest, and the Deadly Politics of the Great Game for Oil. Charlotte Dennett, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I'm so delighted. I really enjoyed the book, by the way.
Thank you very much.
And
it was an audio book.
Yes, my listeners hopefully know that I like to jokingly say I pay people to read books to me.
Yeah, right. I love the audio version. I very early on I listened to the readers' inflections and so on, and I really liked it. So, bravo for audiobooks.
Yes. I just wish that the authors could make more money than they probably do from the audiobook.
You're absolutely right on that, but okay.
Yeah, that's controlled by the overlords, and you get your dollar or whatever, $50, and we move on. It's very, very few people can make a living writing books.
You are absolutely right about that, which is why I had to become a lawyer to pay the bills.
Now, tell us about that. What is your? I'm assuming you passed the bar somewhere. What's your current situation with being a lawyer?
Well, we have a unusual way to become a lawyer in the state of Vermont where I live, and it's called the Law Office Program, and I think there are probably 4 left in the country. And you can apprentice in a law firm, learn the ropes, and then after 6 years of, I think it was 30 hours a week, you qualify to take the bar exam. And so that's how I got my license to practice law. And
nice.
Since then, I've been a sole practitioner. So I'm not your typical lawyer. But at any rate.
I don't want my typical lawyer. I want you. That's. Is there anything you specialize in?
I got my training in personal injury and medical malpractice, and the reason is that those are the guys that can afford to pay you while you're going through this program. I was the paralegal. They hired me because I had investigative skills. I was an investigative journalist and still am. But that was where I got a lot of training. But I branch out. I do some family law, some child custody, a little bit of environmental. It's a mixed bag, and I just get to choose my clients in struggles for justice. I'm not cynical. I totally believe in struggling for justice, no matter how difficult it is. So that's basically. I have a web page, CharlotteDennett.com, and that includes both the kind of law I practice and a whole bunch of stuff about my books.
Nice, and I had just a little bit of worry that you wouldn't be shamelessly self-promotional. I was wrong.
Oh, no. An author has to be shamelessly self-promotional. I mean, even the publishers don't do the job the way you used to. They're putting it on us more and more.
Yeah.
We got to be experts in social media, which I'm not yet, but I'm trying. And anyway, it's difficult. But if you are really a writer, you have to write no matter what. So you do the best you can.
Yeah, that is not me. I loathe the physical activity of writing. I got issues. That's one of them.
Okay.
But that's okay. We're glad you have
Not
books.
me. I enjoy it. I actually enjoy it very much.
I am delighted. Let's really quick give us a couple other titles that you have written, just so my listeners can go to their favorite bookstore and buy a few.
Okay. Well, the one that came out before that is called The People versus Bush. One lawyer's campaign to bring the president to justice and the national grassroots movement she encounters along the way. That is about my campaign as Attorney General in Vermont to bring Bush to justice, and I was very much influenced by Vincent Bugliosi. Some of your listeners may be familiar with him, but he wrote a very provocative book called "The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder," and he established a framework for going after him, even on the murder charge. And then he said he was looking for an attorney general or a state's attorney to carry it out. And he couldn't find anybody, but I heard about it. And since I was running for Attorney General, I contacted him and said, well, look, I can make it part of my campaign. But I got into it very late. I mean, I got into it in September before the November elections, and we thought there was just a sliver of hope because Vermont was just hugely anti-Bush, anti-war.
Right.
In the southern town of Brattleboro, they threatened to arrest him if he ever set foot in Vermont. So we thought we had a chance, but the problem is that once we had our press conference, which was widely covered, the media just shut us out completely. A lot of people didn't even know I was running, so we lost it. It was quixotic, but I wrote a book about it, The People versus Bush. And then the current book is what I call the crash of Flight 3804 is sort of the backstory. I mean, why me, of all people, would want to step up and do this campaign? And if you read The Crash, you will understand why.
Excellent. And, of course, another book, Follow the Pipelines.
Now, Follow the Pipelines is coming out in February.
Oh, that's not out yet.
It's not out yet.
Okay.
It's coming out early February. It's the paperback version, and it's got a new afterword, but I think it's an effort to reach a different audience. I mean, there are sort of two audiences in this book. One is people who love mystery and spy stories and personal narratives, which is woven into the book. Other people want to get right to the point about how pipelines have contributed to endless wars in the Middle East. So, anyway, you can get both books.
Yeah, well...
and then the third book I should mention, because
Please.
I'm very proud of it. Can I?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. All right. This was a massive undertaking. The title is Thy Will Be Done, The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil. Someone pointed out there are 18 words in the title, and it took us 18 years to complete this massive undertaking. But it's been called an anatomy of conquest. I mean, we really figured it out. What was responsible for the genocide of indigenous people in the Amazon? Who were the forces behind it? We eventually discovered that it was sort of the Eastern elites headed by Nelson Rockefeller, and they used missionaries, evangelical missionaries, to pacify the Indians so they could then move their oil companies and agribusiness and ranches onto their lands. It's a stunning story, and if anybody wants to understand how the world operates from the top of the mountain, namely the Rockefeller sphere of influence, this is the book to read. It's now out in ebook, so you can get it that way. If you want to buy the book, it's incredibly expensive. It's like a collector's item because it was suppressed.
Yeah. Well, it is amazing, and it's an ongoing history of humans that some people with money and power control things, and some people who don't have money and power get shit on or killed.
Yeah, that's kind of it. And what's so annoying, though, is that the people at the highest levels are laughing their heads off at us because they're immune. They consider themselves immune, and frankly, they are.
Yeah,
impunity reigns. It's just extraordinary.
Well, in my specific industry, in the financial services industry, any given day I can read a story about someone who ripped off millions of dollars from their clients, and they got a $500,000 penalty, and they're on probation. And it's like, but if I get caught with, I don't even know what the right measurement is, a gram of cocaine, I'm in jail for 10 years.
Yeah, really.
And,
I mean, how fair is that?
Yeah, it's not the scale.
But I'm in arguments with people even now who just cannot conceive that there would be so much skullduggery at the highest levels. And I guess they've been sheltered. They don't understand how it works. And so it makes it very difficult for lawyers who care, who may be inclined to go after the big boys. It's difficult. And also investigative journalists. It's really a difficult path, but it has to be done. I
have had a few occasions in the past where people tell me that, Phil, the financial investment scams can't be anywhere near as bad as you're saying because banks aren't there to rip people off. And I was like, what? What? You're defending the really large banks? I don't know how to handle that.
Well, look at the situation right now. I mean, it's been a year, right? A year since January 6th.
Yes.
And none of the organizers have gone to jail. I mean, I consider it a treasonous act. There are other people who don't, but even some of my friends. But I thought it was. I consider what happened an insurrection, an effort to overturn the elections, which is a friggin' coup d'etat.
Yes.
And if it were in another country, you would see the organizers rounded up and thrown in jail.
I know that from the very beginning, I called it a failed coup.
Yeah.
And I was surprised that when they finally got some police and or soldiers on the scene, why wasn't there just a perimeter made and everyone was pushed like cattle through a section and arrested on spot? Anyone that was caught on the grounds,
Right.
you're tagged and you're cuffed and you're zip tied and you're sat down, and we have 5,000 people sitting on the lawn waiting to be sent away, and the trial's starting right away. But it didn't work that way.
Yeah, well, anyway, so we're still waiting.
Yeah.
I mean, even members of Congress, some of them are getting very frustrated. They don't think that the Attorney General is acting fast enough, and then there are other people saying, give him a chance, give him a chance. But if you look at what's happened, I would say ever since the Kennedy assassination, which I think was probably a real turning point in history, it's been very difficult to get accountability. And one of the things I should add that came out of that, maybe your listeners know this, but the origin of branding people who wanted to investigate as conspiracy theorists came after the Kennedy assassination, and the CIA put out a memo saying, "Well, we got to deal with this. We're gonna label them conspiracy theorists," and so that's stuck ever since. So those of us who are investigative journalists will often get branded, and I mean there are insane conspiracies out there. We know that.
Yes, indeed.
But you would think that there would be enough intelligent people to be able to differentiate between the insane ones and the real ones. And, so Michael Moore once said, I hate conspiracy theories unless they're proven to be true.
Yes.
Anyway.
Fair enough. Now, the crash of Flight 3804 involved your father. Can you tell us a little bit about him and what actually happened?
Yeah, my father, I did not know my father. He died when I was 6 weeks old. He was America's first master spy in the Middle East. He was stationed in Lebanon. He was sent over there in early 1944. The war was still going on. He was with the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was America's first wartime real intelligence agency, predecessor to the CIA. And he went undercover as cultural attaché, which was a very good cover for him because he was highly knowledgeable of the region. He spoke and read Arabic. He had read the Quran. He was totally in love with the culture. And so it was perfect. And he had taught at the American University of Beirut, which is based in Beirut, which has been described as the second most important American asset in the Middle East next to oil. And so he developed a lot of connections. So he was good in his job. And his last mission was to Saudi Arabia. This was in March 47. And his mission was to determine the route of the Trans-Arabian Pipeline. This was going to carry that incredibly valuable Saudi oil across the the peninsula, and over to a terminal point on the Mediterranean Sea, where it would then be shipped off to Europe to help with reconstruction during the Marshall Plan period. And so that was his last mission, and he never made it home. He took a flight, sort of last minute flight to Ethiopia, and en route the plane crashed. There were 6 on board, and they were all connected to what I call the Great Game for Oil. That's why I titled the book The Crash, Flight 3804, because once you understand who was on the plane, what was on the plane, that was certain aerial cameras, for instance, that were going to take pictures of pipeline routes and highly sensitive telecommunications equipment. So anyway, he died in that plane crash, and I eventually, when I became a reporter in the Middle East in the early 70s, I started to realize I was sort of following his footsteps, and I wanted to know more about him. And that started me on my quest. Who was this man? How am I going to learn about him? And I sued the CIA through Freedom of Information. I got some good documents that way. I visited the archives. Almost all of his reports were declassified, as are most OSS reports, and they're in the National Archives. So I was able to piece together a story and come up with a hypothesis about how or who was responsible for the plane crash.
Very interesting. And of course, it comes down to a lot about oil, a lot about money, a lot about power. And I think, correct me here if I'm wrong, but for those who are geopolitically challenged, if Saudi Arabia wants a pipeline to take oil to the Mediterranean, Saudi Arabia doesn't touch the Mediterranean. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they have to go through someone else's land, and whose land is that going to be? I mean, it's Palestine, Israel, Lebanon. There's a lot of hot spots.
Exactly. See, that's what makes it so fascinating. First of all, I got a hold of his last report and his last letter home, which in the trunk in the family attic, I discovered these wonderful scrapbooks, letters home, his last report, all this. So that was a great lead for me. And then I went to the New York Times, and I found this fantastic article dated March 2, 1947, and it was all about the pipeline and all about the geopolitical intrigue behind it, because this was America suddenly coming on strong by virtue of its control of Saudi oil. And all the other colonial powers were intensely jealous of this, particularly the British and the French, but also the Soviets were coming on strong. So that is the underlying theme of what happened to this pipeline. And it was finally determined that its terminal point would not be in Palestine because there was too much conflict going on at that time.
Yeah.
The effort to create the State of Israel, the Jewish attacks against the British colonials, and Southern and Arab and Jewish conflict was going on at the time. So they opted for Lebanon, and my father favored Lebanon. So that's where it terminated. But that led me to further investigation when I realized that another component to having to decide where a pipeline goes through and how it can safely go through a number of conflict-prone territories is you need military. You need to protect the pipeline. And so what I ultimately did is, once the Iraq War started years later, I figured there had to be an oil connection to that, and lo and behold, I found that one, very much so. And then I found oil and pipeline connections to the Syria war, and then there's the whole conflict with Iran. I mean, it's all about friggin' oil.
Yeah,
That's what it's about, is the bottom line. And people may have trouble accepting it. A lot of people believe it, but they didn't know exactly how it operates. So that's what I show in my book through historical research and also showing maps. I have 12 maps showing pipeline routes.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of mind-blowing. It's a good way of easing your way into the Middle East conflicts which seem endlessly complicated until you understand what it's all about.
Yeah, it's a few different actors trying to get allies and acting together and trying to share the spoils. And virtually every country that's ever found significant oil reserves, the people may rejoice at first because they think they're going to have a better life, but it doesn't really work out that way. And the people who are wealthy control the oil. The people who are wealthy get the government to help them. And I think that through the U.S. military, there's a whole lot of assistance that's provided to American and other international oil companies that help subsidize those companies to be able to get oil to us cheaply. And if we actually incorporated the true cost of what it takes to put gasoline in our cars, we probably all switch to solar and wind overnight.
Yeah, wow, that's so well put.
Oh, you're
you
very
really
kind.
got it down. Good for you. That's so right, and it's that one of the things I'm trying to do is make connection with climate activists, because they know the role of oil clearly, but the story that has yet to be told until, I think, well, my book and a few others, is that, yes, there's terrible destruction to land and to peoples with these pipelines, but it's the endless wars, the millions of lives lost because of these subterranean oil wars, which are presented to the public as, for instance, civil wars, for instance. And there's a huge cover-up of what's really going on, which does involve the very players you're talking about. Obviously, spies play a big role in this. They're the first scouts that get out there. They got to figure out where is the opposition going to come from. It even harkens back to the conquest of the West, where like missionaries are sent out and scouts like Davy Crockett to figure out who's hostile and who's friendly. And it's still going on all over the world. And even though we're making progress towards alternative energy, those oil companies are still out there doing it. They're still grabbing land and trying to get concessions to hold for themselves. So we got a big struggle ahead of us. And I want readers to understand that this is another huge, tragic dimension to the fossil fuel industry, which has, brought progress, but also brought tremendous loss of life and environmental devastation.
Well, I could see if your company is making you a lot of money by selling oil that you don't want it to end. And so you find ways, either legitimate through commerce or not so legitimate. You're going to try anything and everything that you can. And the book lays it out pretty clear. And the problem is that the people who are using the oil, predominantly Europe, at least locally to the Middle East, the United States, which may not need so much of that oil, but they consume so much oil that they can't ship much out. And now coming back on the scene, China and Russia, whether they want to buy or sell oil, it gets very complicated.
Well, it gets complicated in one sense, but not so complicated in another sense. Well, I mean, it does for foreign policy. I mean, the whole thing about Ukraine right now. You will hear some of the mainstream media just happen to mention that natural gas is a big issue right now.
Yeah.
And Ukraine is traversed by these pipelines that were originally owned by the Soviets, and then there's the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but Russia still owns some of those pipelines. But there's this massive effort on the part of the U.S. to circumvent Russian supplies of natural gas to Europe, and so that's what they've been doing. That was one of the things that Trump was doing. He really built up natural gas. These are minor fossil fuel companies who are trying to get into markets, and they hate the majors who inevitably get the big contracts. So they're trying to find their way in. And so all the dealings with Ukraine was about finding ways to supply American natural gas to Europe and to Ukraine. And that's the struggle that's going on right now. If you Google Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is finally been completed, but the U.S. is still trying to prevent it, which would supply a lot of natural gas to Germany. And the complication in that is that Germany wants that natural gas, and so the U.S. is limited in how it can negotiate, for instance, sanctions against Russia and anybody that has anything to do with that pipeline. That's the whole underlying ugly story.
And that's probably a lot of the reason why many European countries are quite a bit ahead of us as far as electric cars. Many of the gas stations already have electric towers to charge your cars because they're kind of being held up in an economic standpoint by Russia. If you want to power things, if you want to have heat in the winter, you have to buy our natural gas through a pipeline that goes through another country, the Ukraine.
Yep, that's true. So there it is, and it's just going to continue. I mean, all this news right now about is there going to be war? Are the Russians going to occupy Ukraine? And I don't really think they want war because they know once it starts, God help us. All right, so a lot of brinkmanship,
and that won't make the pipelines secure.
Pardon me?
That won't make the pipelines secure if you start a war.
That's absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. What the powers that be want more than anything else is stability, and so they're going to try to prevent a war. Yes, somebody's calling.
Sure.
Get rid of it.
It's all good. What else should we know about you or your book? I know, right?
Well, first of all, the book had the great misfortune of coming out during the lockdown. Its publication was April 2020. So all my personal appearances, my book tours, everything canceled. And thank God for Zoom. I mean, if there hadn't been Zoom, then it would be really rough. But it hurt the book. It most definitely did. I mean, I actually like to go out to bookstores. I like to talk to people.
I hear you.
And have the exchange. And you hear me.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, my God. I'm dying to get out.
But, so now there's a paperback coming out in February, and now we're stuck with more COVID, and, oh, my God, I don't know. You just have to struggle through it. That's all I can say. But, this book is the result of, a lifetime of research, and highly recommended. It's shameless self-promotion,
there it
but
is.
The reviews have been absolutely fantastic. And I think the reviews, you'll find them on Amazon, are great because someone's finally broken through to the enigma of all these wars in the Middle East in a way that's personal as well as geopolitical. And by the way, that is the word I want to emphasize, geopolitics. Most of the world leaders have a geopolitical perspective on the world. That is, where can we get what resource? What do we have to do to get it? What pieces of territory do we traverse? How can we use our intelligence and our military to get it? I mean, that's how they operate.
Yeah.
But the people aren't told that. And that's one thing I really want to have people develop a geopolitical consciousness. I don't know how much more time we have. I could say one more thing.
Yeah, tell me.
About history, the importance of history. It's extremely important. And one of the things that I did after I looked at that Trans-Arabian pipeline, there's a map there, and it shows not only the projected tap line, as it's called, but it also shows two other pipelines, and they originate in Iraq, and the northern route goes to northern Lebanon, and the southern route goes to Haifa, which was then Palestine. And one of the things I did is I started to think these pipelines were built in the 30s, but they had to be conceived earlier, and they were conceived right during and after World War I, when the world navies, particularly the British, were converting from coal to oil, and the Brits needed a supply of oil, and the oil of Iraq was the great prize of World War I. But how are they going to ship it to market? They're going to have it go overland and have it terminate in Haifa, where at this very same time, Lord Balfour, the Foreign Secretary, writes a letter to Walter de Rothschild, very big oil man. It's called the Balfour Declaration, which supports the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So what I'm saying is there is an oil connection there. It was the perfect terminal point for this Iraq oil pipeline that was going to feed to the British Navy. And, if you have European Jews there, then you think that it will be better protected than Islamic regimes. So that's where it was. And that accounts, in my opinion, for the huge amount of military support that's gone to Israel, not only for that pipeline, which was eventually, it was closed down in 48 during the war for independence for Israel, but Benjamin Netanyahu clamored to get it reopened, and that was going to be through the Iraq War. That was the plan. It was going to reopen that pipeline so the oil could flow to Israel again, and then Israel wanted to turn itself into an energy corridor all along the eastern Mediterranean. And the only thing that stopped that plan was that Lebanon and Syria, if you look on a map, they're north of Palestine, they're in the way. But anyway, you see what I mean by a geopolitical analysis?
Yeah. Because if you can't get through Syria, well, then you can go through Iraq. Well, you can't really go through Iraq, so you go to Jordan, and then you can't really go through Jordan. And
so you go underground, you go beneath the sea, which is what they're doing now. They've got an underwater pipeline headed through Cyprus and on to Europe. That's the plan now. Meanwhile, though, you may have noticed that both Lebanon and Syria have been totally flattened. They are now failed state. What a tragedy.
Absolutely. If I can change the subject to something completely unrelated, when you and I talked previously, I discovered that you know a little bit of Italian. How did that happen?
Yeah, the Italian. Well, let's see. It happened because when I was living in Lebanon, I was there for a while in the 70s, early 70s, and it's very hot in the summer. And my mother took me to Europe, my first trip to Europe, and I just fell in love with Italy. And then I went away to college, and by going to Italy, the world of art and architecture just opened up to me. It just blew my mind.
Yes.
And then I went away to college, and I ended up majoring in art history. And after college, I learned that there was a way to get a master's degree in art history in Florence, of all wonderful places. So that's how I learned. I had to learn Italian, and took my courses in Italian. It was just an absolutely unique and wonderful experience.
So I assume at some point you saw Il Davide, the David.
I saw what?
The David statue.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course. Well, my apartment was right in what's called the Piazza di Signoria, which overlooks the Uffizi, and the David statue is right down there. And I would climb up 200 stairs, and then my window opened up on the Duomo, the beautiful dome of Brunelleschi. And I mean, it was in heaven. I was in art history heaven at that time.
I'm so jealous. Oh man.
Yeah.
I need to get back. I'm itching.
You need to get back?
I need to get back to Italy. And of course the problem is that even if I ignored all the current rules, as soon as I get to Italy, they're not going out either. And some people that are going out, they probably won't want to talk to you. And if they do want to talk to you, it's through a mask. And
yeah, it's terrible. Can't we just get over this? Honest to God,
that'd be nice. That'd be nice.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Well,
you didn't mention. Or there one other little link here, which may interest people, and I know it interests you. Is that I think you may have discovered me because I was interviewed on Freedom from Religion
Foundation
radio.
Yep.
Yeah, and which has had my brother on many times, Daniel Dennett, the philosopher. So thought I would just throw that one out too.
Well, that's
for all your atheist listeners.
Yes, I didn't want to mention that because I didn't want it to seem to anybody like I was taking away from your achievements, because that's why you're on.
Well, that's very kind of you. That's very kind of you.
So I'm happy that you mentioned it, but I didn't want to bring it up because it wasn't like, oh, Daniel's busy. Let's get Charlotte on. I really wanted you on to talk about this important subject material. So thank you.
That was kind of you.
How can people...
Kind and sensitive of you.
Don't tell anyone. But how can people reach you if they want to learn more or help you promote the work or have you come talk for eventual conferences that come back?
Well, I put my contact information pretty openly. It's on my website, charlottedennett.com, but it's also you can reach me by email, chardennettlaw@gmail.com. And believe you me, what I want is just to get the information out there. That's what I want more than anything else. So I would be happy to talk on podcasts like yours, or maybe one day I'm supposed to be out on the West Coast this summer. God knows if it happens, but
yeah. I'm optimistic for summer, so fingers crossed.
Yes.
And of course, thank you for sharing all this time. And of course, you know this already, my listeners don't, that I screwed up at the previous appointment time and you were kind enough to schedule another time to talk. So thank you for that. And again, my apologies for screwing that up.
No problem at all, Phil. I enjoyed it very much, and I think your questions were well put.
You're very kind, and thank you for spending time on The Phil Ferguson Show. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
You doing all right? You staying awake? Show is not too boring, I hope. Some other thoughts. Oh, by the way, reminder, Patreon listeners, I'm pretty sure I'm going to eventually completely close down the Patreon website. I enjoyed it. Patreon treated me nice. It was nice to have some extra income, but I am cleaning up some income sources, like the ads for the show are gone, and any revenue I make from Patreon are gone, and I wanted them to be gone, and they were, by the end of 2021, just for regulatory and registration issues. So if you're getting the show from Patreon, maybe one or two more episodes, I'm just gonna make that go away. There's almost nobody left there using the link there, so that's cool. Thank you for moving. And hopefully, if you stopped, well, you all did stop contributing to me because I turned off collection of revenue. Hopefully you've sent that to somebody else, someone who is making content that you also like, and you want to motivate them and reward them a little bit for their effort. So thank you for doing that. And if you're not a Patreon of somebody, maybe you should be. I mean, if you're getting by, if you're just barely getting by and paying your bills, don't worry about it. But I know I have a lot of listeners who have some money. You don't have to give a ton, but a couple of dollars per show or a couple of dollars per month can really help people make content that can help educate other people that might find it. Another bit of news that happens to kind of match up with regulations, I have talked to a, what was their name? I don't know, a transfer consultant? No. Shit, I don't know. I talked to someone at Schwab. Someone at Schwab that's going to help advisors transition. Yeah, it's a transition representative, something like that, from TD Ameritrade to Schwab. As you may know, if you're a regular listener, recently, a couple years ago, Schwab bought TD Ameritrade. The most amazing thing in my life as an employee, sometimes as a manager, and in other situations, I've been involved with company mergers or one company buying another company. And I have developed the expectation that once that happens, it's just lie after lie after lie. The companies say, we're gonna work together. We're gonna leverage the potentiality of both organizations. We're gonna maximize the efficiencies and all kinds of MBA fancy buzzwords to make you think, oh my God, it's gonna be the best thing that's ever happened. Since the dawn of man, this merger is symbiotic. Well, at the very beginning, the first time I heard about this was from TD Ameritrade, and they said, hey, look, we were struggling to make money. We've decided to sell to Schwab. We've made a bunch of money. We're not merging with Schwab. We're going to work with Schwab where possible, but Schwab is going to own us once it clears regulatory hurdles, and it's all going to go to Schwab. And I was like, wait, what? They just gave us straight up honest information. That was nice, surprising, nice. And since then, over the last couple of years, I've been to many webinars. I've gotten many documents from TD Ameritrade at first, and then some from Schwab, and now from TD Ameritrade and Schwab collectively. And a lot of information I get has the logos, and they have some high-level person from each company sign the documents, still with the names of the two companies. And it's been very informative. It's been very frank. It's been very, dare I say, to the best of my knowledge, accurate. And when it first happened, I figured one of the last things they were going to do was fuck around with the advisors, because that's not really where the money is at for somebody like TD Ameritrade or Schwab. It's in people that do rapid trading, which should tell you something about rapid trading. They make a lot of money from day traders, from people that buy services, that do research, that do all these things to try to beat the market. We've already talked about that in this episode. That's where they make a good chunk of their money. And so I was concerned, or hopefully optimistic, or expected that advisors would be last, which would be nice because they'd leave us alone. But then I was also a little worried that they would fuck that all up. The nice thing is, because of all these presentations that I've went to, I've just become more and more comfortable that they're not fucking it up. As an example, as an advisor, when I go look at all of the clients, all the accounts, everything that I manage, I have a special portal that I sign in with TD Ameritrade. If someone is a manager that uses Schwab as their custodian, of course, they have a portal. Well, there are teams, IT people at TD Ameritrade, and there's IT people at Schwab, and they've been cross-pollinating. So people at Schwab have talked to advisors that use Schwab and TD Ameritrade, and they say, well, what do you use at TD Ameritrade that you like that we don't have? Because now it's not stealing corporate information because you own both companies. So the Schwab platform has been adding some of the features that the TD Ameritrade platform has that the Schwab platform doesn't have. But at the same time, possibly redundant, they've slowly added a few features to the TD Ameritrade platform that I use that I didn't used to have. I didn't even know existed. I didn't even know that I wanted. But I can now use that because someone said, hey, Schwab has this. We should have this over at TD Ameritrade. So these platforms are kind of morphing to become more like each other. So when that eventual day comes, when everything transfers over to Schwab, at least for the advisors, there's going to be a lot less of a learning curve. I'm going to already know some things about it. But I don't want to be in the mass exodus when it finally happens. And so I called Schwab and I said, when is this going to happen? They sent me a document that says that the expected time frame now for when all advisors and advisor clients, people who are my clients, are going to move to Schwab is going to be the second or third quarter of calendar year 23. So I had suggested initially it would be 2 or 3 years. It's now going to be 3 years plus, give or take, which is fine. It's not broke. Let's move slowly. And I had a prospective client that said, hey, Phil, I have accounts at Schwab. Any chance, since they're going to merge together anyway? And I wasn't particularly optimistic, but when I called the Schwab person, they're like, yeah, we can do that. So I am going to register Polaris Financial Planning at, I don't know if register, sign up, join Schwab, and have this one client get started on Schwab. And this is probably going to take 2 to 3 months. It's complicated, and I got a lot of other things to do, but I'm optimistic that it's going to go relatively smoothly, and I'll have one client at Schwab. Then I might move a couple of other clients. But for the most part, and the biggest problem is going to be that everyone else will stay at TD Ameritrade, because to move from TD Ameritrade to Schwab at this time, one would have to do what's called repapering. And anyone who is a client of mine and we use TD Ameritrade, you may remember all of the forms you have to fill out, to applications to open up an IRA, a Roth IRA, an individual, a joint account. You want to change beneficiaries, there's a form for that. You want to connect your bank, there's a form for that. Well, some of it you can do online. A lot of stuff has forms. And right now, if you switch to a new advisor, say you fired Phil, or you wanted to go to Schwab now, we'd have to do all of that stuff, which for you may not be that awful. But I have approximately 150 households, often with 2 people, and sometimes they have 4, 5, 6, 7 different accounts. And I would have to be involved with doing applications and all of the tedious backup documentation that's required to do that for almost 500 different accounts. And as you can imagine, I don't want to do that. So the plan is hopefully in 2023, when Schwab and TD Ameritrade get this all figured out, that virtually every account will just move over one day from TD Ameritrade to Schwab. And as we get closer to that date, of course, I will share with clients and listeners, and a lot of clients are listeners, and thank you. That makes both of our lives a little bit easier. I'll go over some of the details as they become known of exactly how and when that's going to happen. It may be in waves, it may be in groups, it may be all at once, it may be by advisor, it may be by client's last name, I don't know. So I'll keep you posted. But I thought I would share that Schwab and TD Ameritrade are both being very mature and adults about this whole process. They're being very informative, providing me a level of comfort I did not expect I would have. And now I'm starting the process ahead of schedule to open up a relationship with Polaris and Schwab in the next few months and get one client set up on that platform so I can learn and navigate. Not necessarily something I have time for right now, but hopefully it's an investment for myself and for Polaris and for all of my clients, because when that transfer eventually happens, I'll already know my way around and can find forms and answer questions with less confusion and less of the times that I'll have to say, I don't know, I'll have to call and get back to you, which I'm perfectly fine with. I just don't want to do it all the time. So anyway, some random thoughts that apply to clients and maybe listeners if you have accounts at one or more of those organizations. I'm going to wrap it up here. Hopefully the next in-person event is American Atheist Convention in April, I think it is, Easter weekend. I had tickets to a concert to see one of my favorite bands at the end of January that just got delayed, postponed, rescheduled. So things are shitty right now. Stay safe. Don't get infected. Be kind. Care for others. general stuff. And I hope to see you out there in the world sometime soon. Until then, ciao.
Well, I was born too late to play in the Rolling Stones. I don't know Jimmy Page, I never met Yoko Ono. Standing with a Strat, I'm rock and roll's bastard son. Go out, get drunk, get laid, have fun. Don't got $1 million, don't drive a Cadillac. Give me half a chance, cause I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. I've been machine gun, handgun, hijack, left for dead. Dive bomb, napalm, nuclear warheaded. Dropped from a jet plane with no parachute. Shot by a firing squad and raped by a business suit. Dancing on a landmine, one leg left. I can still crawl and I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. Well, you're bigger, rougher, meaner, tougher, dirtier and uglier and sneakier and trickier. You wanna shoot me with a gun, cut me with a knife. Take your bare hands and rip out my eyes. Kick me in the balls and you bit me in the neck. Well, hit me again, cause I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. Well, there's a mugger in the alley, there's a sniper in the hall. There's a girl at the bar, wants to get me by the balls.